Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome. I'm Rob Doherty, and this is the FSTVS Podcast Executive Edition, supported by Liberia Consulting and hosted by Julian Scott, the animation consultant for Film London. In this podcast series, we'll be chatting to the movers and the shakers in the animation industry and discovering a little bit more about what they do, how they got there, their thoughts on the animation industry, and I hope get to meet the person behind that executive title. From Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network to PBS, and now as the head of character development and scripted content at Duolingo, Linda Simensky's career is a true masterclass in seizing opportunities and knowing when to take a step back in order to move forward and continue doing what she loves. With a passion for animation that started at a young age, Linda has carried that enthusiasm into every executive role she's taken on. Not only has she been a fierce advocate for the audience, but she's also been a powerful voice for women in the industry. So grab your favourite beverage and enjoy Julian's conversation with Linda Simensky.
Linda, thank you so much for finding the time to chat today.
Well, Julian, thank you for inviting me. This is going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it.
Let's hope so. Now, in the time that we've known each other, which, to be honest, has got to be about 25 years, you've had some very high-profile roles at key US networks, Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and PBS, and your creative drive has been behind iconic shows like Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Laboratory, Rugrats, and Doug. Animation magazine listed you in the top 10 most influential people in animation, and The Hollywood Reporter put you on its Women in Entertainment Power 100 list. But most recently, in 2021, you joined Duolingo as head of animation and scripted content. And obviously Duolingo is the brilliant language learning app which you've helped steer into something very much more, which we'll get into a little bit later on, what fueled the move, what you've been doing, especially as your job title has recently changed to head of character development and scripted content. But before we do that, let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to when you were at school. Did you have an interest in cartoons at all then? Were there any shows or films that resonated with you? Did you ever try animation yourself?
Yes, to all of those. And so the story starts when I'm about 2 and I discovered television and loved Bugs Bunny. And there is even my my Halloween photo from age 2. I am dressed as Tweety Bird, and my baby book says loves to watch cartoons. And so my parents had clocked this pretty early on, and it was Bugs Bunny that I truly loved, and I spent a lot of time after school watching Bugs Bunny. Like that was the ritual after school was get home, have a snack, watch Bugs Bunny, then do homework. And so it was really like built in that was what I did. And this era of animation was not a great one. There were no big Disney films during this era. It's like by the time I was aware of animation films. I think it was Aristocats that was coming out. That was not the peak of Disney. So I watched a lot of The Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights, with everybody. But I was really so much more of a Bugs Bunny fan and a Looney Tunes fan. And, there wasn't much more to see beyond that other than, things on TV that were kind of old. And, I did watch Saturday morning TV, but that wasn't that interesting to me. But, I watched things like Rocky and Bullwinkle as a kid, and I remember watching it with my mom. And she would laugh, so I would laugh, although I didn't know why we were laughing. I just knew this was funny, and it was important because she was watching it. So that was sort of my cartoon history. When I got to high school, I had taken a filmmaking class, and we learned about stop motion right from the beginning, and we did some pixelation. And I brought in a bag of Legos and built a little house in stop motion, which I think is a popular thing to do for your first film. So I did that, and then I immediately got to work trying to animate. So I was, I guess, probably a junior in high school at this point. And I realized pretty quickly that I was not cut out for this. And it was partly because I I didn't really have the knowledge of what I needed to be doing. I just wanted to start animating, and I thought it was hard. And I decided that the world didn't need any more mediocre animators, and that was that. And so I kind of like, I had decided when I was 14 that I was going to be a, writer for Bugs Bunny. And my mother said, well, I don't think it's in production anymore. And so I was like, well, maybe we can bring it back. And so this was all sort of my thinking, is that I'd learned to animate, I'd learned to write for Bugs Bunny, and that would be that. And so not much happened until I got to college and continued watching Bugs Bunny, and nobody else was watching Bugs Bunny. So I was sort of this anomaly, and people kind of had the "why are you here anyway" kind of attitude. Like, why are you studying at Penn if you just want to work in animation? And I used to answer that with, well, I'm developing my sense of humor. And made me very popular at school. But, I continued, like, I wrote papers about, like, why do people watch Bugs Bunny and why do people watch reruns? And, it was the early 80s, and I was really trying to figure out all of this thinking. And it turned out, this made me like the perfect person to go work in cable. I was knowledgeable about Bugs Bunny and reruns. So, nobody else was writing papers on that. So, I was sort of like, preparing myself. So I got a summer job after my sophomore year. I got a summer job at Warner Brothers. Now I was just reading scripts for them, and that was it. And, like photocopying things, but I was at Warner Brothers, and that was my goal. And so, while I was there, I just happened to unexpectedly meet an HR person from the new cable division there, the Warner Amex, satellite entertainment part of Warner Brothers. And under Warner Amex Satellite was MTV and Nickelodeon. And so I had said to this woman, I basically met her on an elevator, followed her into her office, and said, how do I get a summer job working at MTV next summer? And she gave me her card and said, call me sometime in the spring. So I called her in the spring, and she, at that point, it was really too late to get a job at MTV, but she said, do you want to temp this summer at Warner's? And I said, sure. So she said, yeah, just call me and we can, probably find you something. What she found for me was basically a summer job working for one of the producers at Nickelodeon.
Wow.
And so I was, I didn't even know about Nickelodeon really at that point. So I was beyond thrilled. I worked for this producer all summer, and she was doing things like Mr. Wizard's World, and you can't do that on television. It was that era. And Belle and Sebastian, the cartoon, was acquired. And so, I like sat in with the team that was reformatting that. And so I had a lot of fun moments that summer. I met a lot of crucial people, Linda Kahn, Ann Sweeney, Jerry Laybourne, all of those people were sort of medium level executives at that point. But, nevertheless, there were 20 people at Nick. Probably 7 of them were interns or temps like me. And I came out of that summer thinking, okay, that's exactly where I want to be. So that's kind of the early years in a nutshell. So really you could say that your entry into the business, the whole reason that you're sitting here talking to me now, was because of that sort of slightly tenacious moment when you said to this lady, mm-hmm. How do I get a job? Yeah. My career is just a series of moments like that where, I just saw an opportunity and jumped. I've always been very single-minded about wanting to work in animation. When I saw my first, there was a tournée of animation, and it ran at Penn for a couple of years. And when I saw the first one, I was like, yes, that is the kind of thing I want to do. These independent animators, who are they? And, I want to work in that area. And in my mind, I was combining Bugs Bunny and now the National Film Board, which I've just learned about, and these independent filmmakers. How do I get that kind of animation on TV? So when I worked at Nick, I kind of locked on Nick thinking, okay, this is the place that's going to let me work with them on figuring out animation. And they're going to let me bring these kinds of animators into that world because these people are those kinds of thinkers. And this was just me, at 21 thinking, yeah, this is like where it's going to happen. And then it did. I mean, I didn't really know that it was going to happen there, but I was convinced that of every place in the industry, Nickelodeon was absolutely the place to go if I wanted to do this. And so my first job there, I mean, I worked at Showtime for a year, so I didn't get a job at Nick right after college. I was an assistant at Nick, and Peter Chernin was one of the people that I worked for at that point. So that was cool. The other guy, not as interesting, but
you're going to name names? No, I'm kidding. You don't have to.
I remember his name. That's but I was very taken with Peter Chernin because I thought he was so smart and so cool, and I just listened to everything that he said, and whatever he said to do, I did it happily because I could just tell, he was a really interesting guy. And then of course he went on to run Fox and now his own company. So that was really interesting, Showtime. I met a couple of key people who just, sort of did little things for me. One person took me to my first ASIFA meeting. And so that was very, pivotal for me. I got involved with ASIFA after that. I was so excited to find a place that was running independent animation on a monthly basis. So that was good. And then a job opened up at Nick. They were hiring 2 new programming people. And I applied for the job and they remembered me and they hired me, and that was really great. So I went there right after I got the job. It was October of 86. And so I started at Nick at that point and worked in the programming department for not quite 3 years. When they started up the animation department, everybody there had heard me talk about how much I loved animation and how much I wanted to work in it and all of that. So they came to me and they said, do you want to move into the animation department? And of course I did. And they said, would you rather we need like 2 coordinator level people. Would you rather do production or development? And I said, development, please. And that's how it happened. So I, immediately started calling all the people I knew of, all the people I'd met. Somewhere along the way, I'd met Larry LaFrancis and Gabor Chupo from Klasky Chupo, and I think I had reached out to them for their reel, and then they came to visit me, and I acted like I had an important job, even though I was just a programmer. But when the time came, I called them and I said, "Do you have anything you want to pitch?" And they came in and they did pitch, and Rugrats was one of those pitches. I think it was the 12th of 12 pitches. And so, that was pretty exciting. And, I didn't bring any of the other pitches in until Rocco's Modern Life, but I worked on all the pilots, with Vanessa Coffey, and it was a lot of fun. And, that was my entree into animation at that point.
It's interesting when you're talking, because you mentioned people, very specific people, and people by name, people that you have obviously, influenced you, gave you opportunities, people that you had a great deal of respect for. And I think one of the joys about the animation industry is it still is very people driven. Do you think how important were those relationships to you in making your way through the industry?
Yeah, they were everything really. I think that, I was very lucky because I did meet a lot of interesting people in those early days. And I got to know them because I, was just standing there and they were standing there and we would just chat. And, I was really, very, very excited to be meeting people who were doing the things that I eventually wanted to do. So, I would say, it's the same in cable as it is in animation. It's all about, personal relationships and I liked talking. So, it's like Linda Kahn and Anne Sweeney sat right near me and I just talk to them. They might not have talked to me, but I wanted to talk to them. So I was always sort of hanging around their doors and chatting with them and things like that. And they had all just they had all just been promoted. So everybody had newer jobs. And so I can remember just, talking to them about what they did and what their backgrounds were and what they were working on and, could I help them out and, just that kind of stuff.
And did it feel like pioneer territory? Because, Nickelodeon was starting up their animation department and you went to work there. Did you just see this this great horizon in front of you of things that you could do? Because to an extent, was it a blank canvas?
Yeah, it was really early days. And I liked cable because it seemed a lot more exciting than broadcast TV. Broadcast TV seemed so established and so sort of, conservative and not particularly exciting for somebody just starting out. Whereas cable was like, it was the early years of cable. So it was the attitude was, we can't pay you a lot, but we can give you a lot of exciting things to do. And it was all run by people in their 20s and everybody was young and very motivated and excited about these opportunities. And everyone was very creative. So I felt like I had lucked into the best possible place that I could be. It was sort of like grad school. It was, in fact, sometimes new people would be like, it feels like, college here, everybody just kind of running around and making each other laugh and all. But, we worked hard and I think we knew we were building something exciting. And I think a lot of that was because Jerry was in charge. Jerry Laybourne was really, very amazing as a leader. She kept us informed. She told us funny stories. She motivated us. She made us feel like we were doing something important. She was just really like a very motivational leader for this point in our lives. And I think that really helped kind of make everything gel. And what we were doing was so different. And, kids TV was not that exciting, outside of Nickelodeon. So this opportunity to be doing something differently and making something different was very exciting, especially for someone like myself. I had just gone through 4 years of focusing on kids and media through Annenberg at Penn, and everything that you would read, unless it was about Sesame Street, it was always about how bad kids TV was and what a disappointment it was and how it just kept getting worse. And I felt like, okay, well, this is the big opportunity to make it better. So it really seemed like a great opportunity.
Well, it sounds like it. It's curious, isn't it, when people are doing sort of analysis, and they tend to be done, obviously not by kids, they tend to be done by older people. And the kids could be absolutely adoring it, but
right.
The grown-ups looking at it go, this is very bad for our children. We shouldn't be doing any more of this.
Right.
You were at Nick for, I think, 9 years. Is that right?
Right.
And then there was an opportunity at Cartoon Network. What triggered that move across to Cartoon?
Well, there were a couple of things. One thing is 9 years is a long time to be at a company. And I was very intrigued by Cartoon Network because it seemed like their focus was just on being funny, and that sounded like fun to me. I was just ready for a change. And I met Mike Lazo, and I had been wanting to meet Mike Lazo, but I didn't know him. But then suddenly we were both standing there at the baggage carousel in New York, coming back from Annecy, and we got to talking. I went over to him and I said hi, and we started talking, and he mentioned that he was, he was like, hey, if you ever want to come by and visit, if you're ever in Atlanta. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And then a few days later, he called a mutual friend of ours and wanted to know if I would ever move down to Atlanta and work in programming with them. And my friend said, no, she'll never leave New York. And I heard this and I called him immediately and I said, that is incorrect. I would move to Atlanta and I would work for you. And he said, great, let's have dinner in a few weeks in New York. I'll be up there and let's talk about what the job is and see if you'd be interested. And I really liked Mike Lazo. He seemed like a genius. He was a genius. And the opportunity to work for him sounded like fun. Plus, Cartoon Network was, at the beginning, and the beginning always sounds exciting to me. And so I was excited by this opportunity. I was a little apprehensive about moving to Atlanta, but in the end, I took the job. Betty Cohen, who had worked at Nickelodeon, was down there now running things, and I felt like, okay, I know Betty. Mike seems nice. The people on the team seem great. This, I know Fred. This seems like it could be a lot of fun, and it was. I loved Cartoon Network. I loved working there until the end, and then I was kind of ready to leave. But it was a massive change in management after AOL came in, and I was like, yeah, okay, I've done my time here, time to go. But I loved it there. There was so much creative freedom and so much support, and we just had a lot of fun. And so that was my hope, and that turned out to be the case. So I was always glad that I did that. But, again, it had a lot to do with people. I just thought Mike Lazo would be so interesting to work for. He was so different from anybody I'd met in the industry up till that point. And,
different in what way? What made him different?
He just, he had a different way of thinking about things, and he was, he had come up through the ranks at Turner. He had started out, in the mailroom, and he just, he was very Southern and very, very smart, and just seemed very different.
Okay. That's interesting when you said that, it became time to leave when AOL got involved with Cartoon. And I guess Nickelodeon and Cartoon are pretty rating-driven networks.
Yeah.
And did you get to the point, or did you ever feel that what excited you creatively? And you've mentioned when you joined Nick, sort of ringing up all these people that you've met to come in and pitch me some shows. We're doing some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But did you feel that quest for ratings was beginning to compromise what you wanted to do creatively?
Not really, no. I always saw ratings as being, sort of like how democracy works in TV. Like I kind of viewed it as lots of people make these together, so collaboration is important. It works best when there's a creative visionary at the top. So, creative vision is necessary as well. The rest of us are there to, carry out that vision. And the ratings kind of, they keep you in line. They make you think about the audience. And that's why we were all there, really, is to make something that works for the audience. I used to get frustrated when people would forget about the audience and just make things that they liked, but they weren't really thinking about kids. Some people really didn't want to have to think about kids, but I felt like that's what we were there for. So no, I never had a problem with the ratings. And, I remember, it was kind of fun every day at 4:00, Cartoon Network, the ratings would be posted and we'd check and we'd see how the shows did. And, we'd talk about it. And sometimes it was frustrating if you wanted to make a schedule change and you had to wait for a couple of weeks to see if it was a trend or not. And, but no, the ratings never bothered me. To me, that was just a built-in part of how TV works along with advertising. It's like your job as a creative is to, collect all of these things that you have to use to make a decision. So that never bothered me.
That's interesting. What does excite you creatively? You said, Rugrats, as I think you said, was the 12th of 12 pitches. So you'd obviously been through 11 pitches, which were maybe not quite at Rugrats standard. In fact, there was a rumor that at some of the Cartoon Network parties, you and your team used to act out some of the more bizarre pitches that you've had. Is that true?
So that's an interesting rumor because I've never heard that rumor. But what used to happen was that we would have these meetings where, like, they'd ask us to do a presentation. How does pitching work? So sometimes we would pull out a pitch that we all thought was, sort of ridiculous, and someone would pitch that pitch. And, they would, it would give one of us an opportunity to react to that pitch and talk about, what wasn't quite working about it and what we were looking for. So we would reenact a pitch, but Turner didn't really throw that many parties for us. So there wouldn't have been that many opportunities to do that. But we did the same thing at Nick, although we didn't use existing pitches. I'd just make one up on the spot. And, but people always wanted to understand, well, what are you doing in these pitches? Like, how does it go? And so that was always the purpose of these reenactments, was to explain how a pitch worked.
And is there over your career, is there one particular pitch that has stood out, remained in your memory?
Well, sometimes I remember the good pitches. I remember Craig Bartlett pitching, Hey Arnold, and Mary Harrington basically picking it up right there in the room. It was like, yes, I love this. Let's do it. And that was pretty exciting. That doesn't happen that much, where you just pick it up in the room. I remember a lot of the good pitches, and I remember a lot of really terrible pitches, particularly if somebody, if I tried to say, no, this isn't quite right, and they'd start yelling at me. I can remember those. And, I remember some guy saying, I'm related to Sumner Redstone and you will be making this show. And, it was about a bunch of peas. And I thought, that's probably not going to happen. So I remember like sending a message to Jerry Laybourne saying, I just wanted to let you know what just happened. And, just in case they call you, this is what the pitch was. So I can remember the bad ones and the great ones, and all the rest. They were all, I always tried to make sure that the person pitching felt comfortable, and everybody always looked either terrified or nervous or slightly ill. And, I would always try to do what I could to make people feel relaxed about doing it. I would say, just don't pitch, just tell me about the show. So, but yeah, I took a lot of pitches in my life. And so, the memorable ones are the ones where, someone puts something down in front of you and the design is great and the idea is great. And then you think, this seems so obvious. How is it that this isn't already a show, or there's not already some version of this idea out there? And I always liked those pitches that seemed like, they seemed like they should be shows. And so, that's what I was always looking for. So so for me, design and the log line were really the two things that would rope me in. And, I would always feel like, well, the rest, that'll fall into place.
Interesting.
This podcast is made possible thanks to the support of the awesome Libery Consulting. Libery offers specially tailored industry-related training courses. Check them out at liberyconsulting.com. That's Liberi consulting.com. You can also find links to their fantastic courses on the Festivus website.
Now you, when you were asked about your move from cartoon, where I think by this point you were senior vice president of original animation, and you went across to PBS to become senior director of children's programming. I think you were quoted as saying, I could stay and fight, or I could try something new. And while working for PBS, I saw the possibility of going to the preschool area, which I've become increasingly interested in. Now, you said when you were working at Cartoon, it was just about being funny, having a lot of fun and entertaining the kids and everything else. But PBS is probably better known for more educational programming. So what was that interest that you thought, PBS could be my next stop?
So there were a couple of things going on in my head at that point. One was I was now a parent. I had a son. He was about 2 at that point, and we'd started watching TV. And we were watching a show where some characters, it was on Cartoon Network, they were, beating up a bad guy, and he looked up at me and kind of slugged me in the arm and gave me a big smile, and I was like, ooh, this is probably not good. But, I had never thought about, what I was doing for Cartoon Network if it got watched by a 2-year-old. And I was thinking, well, it's for kids 6 to 11. And, but, a 2-year-old doesn't know that. And, as a mom, I was like, I probably shouldn't have been sitting here watching this with him. And we started watching more preschool programming, and we watched a lot of PBS, and I had a lot of opinions. And so I had a lot of questions about PBS. Like, one, how do they pick these shows? They don't seem very educational, but they also don't seem very funny, other than Arthur. And Clifford's cute, and of course Sesame Street. But these other shows, how did they get them, and why did they pick them, and did someone give them to them? I had all these questions suddenly. I was watching PBS as a parent, but also as a programmer. And I found myself so curious, how does a PBS show get made, and where does the money come from? And I just had all these questions. And so, around the time, I started thinking about a lot of things that my son would like also. My son was very interested in space, and my son was very interested in dinosaurs and sea creatures. And I just kept thinking, where are those shows? Where are the shows that my son would like to watch? Why don't they make those? And I sort of got this idea that I could go to PBS and I could learn how to make preschool shows, because I had worked briefly with Brown at Nick Jr., but really hadn't done much for preschool. But I was curious about, okay, there's this whole part of the industry. I don't know these people. I don't know how to do this. It would be interesting to learn that. And so I applied for the job at PBS thinking I'm probably not going to get this job, but it would be interesting to learn more about it. And, my first reaction was, well, I don't really know anybody at PBS. I don't even know who to call and ask about this. And then I remembered, I do know Pat Mitchell. She was the president of PBS at the time. So I called her, and so she said, I'm kind of surprised that you would want this job. It doesn't really seem like, it doesn't seem like the kind of thing you would have been into. And I said, well, I'm a mom now, and I have a 2-year-old, and I'm really, thinking a lot about what he watches. And I have a lot of ideas about preschool programming. And so I ended up getting offered the job, and the job was, 2 levels lower than the level that I was at, and the job did pay a lot less, but I was looking at something else. I was looking at this idea of making these shows, of making these preschool shows that I thought would be more interesting. I thought there was a lot of opportunity at PBS, and I thought, I'm going to go see if they'll let me do the things I want to do, and if my ideas are any good. And I really just wanted to know the answer to that. And I really wasn't thinking, I never went into TV thinking, okay, I'm going to get rich, and TV complied, and I didn't get rich. And, and I wasn't thinking, okay, I'm going to get to the top of the management chain. And, I really was thinking about, okay, where can I have the opportunities to make the most interesting things? And so at that moment, I decided PBS was that place. And so I went there, and, it took me about a year to really understand what went on there and how they made their decisions and who everybody was and who I needed to know. But, I really liked the people, and I liked the people I was working with, Carol Greenwald, the producer of Arthur. I really wanted to keep working with her. I thought she was incredibly smart and great to work with. And her whole team that she put together was, all the people working on Arthur were brilliant. So, I thought, wow, let's do another show with her. And, there were all these opportunities, the Kratt brothers, and, one by one, I would meet these teams and we'd talk about new ideas, and everybody seemed very interested. And I had I had worked up this big idea, which was, we needed to make shows that were more entertaining and more educational. And everybody at PBS was like, sure, try that. Go for it. That sounds good. And so I did. I said to all the show creators, okay, let's make things that are more educational and a lot funnier. And everyone said, yay. And, out of that came things like Fetch with Ruff Ruffman and Martha Speaks and Odd Squad and Dinosaur Train and Peg Plus Cat and Let's Go Luna. So it was just, one fun show after the next. And it was really just a very exciting time for me. And PBS was really very supportive of my vision, and they just kept letting me do things as long as they did well, and I'd started out with things like Super Y. That was great, so I just had so much freedom, and I didn't blow it. I went to all the great people I could think of, and a lot of people I knew from Nick, and a lot of people I knew from just, working in the industry, and I just, sort of told them what we were looking for and gave them a lot of support, and they all came through. So, I was just very lucky the timing was great. PBS was incredibly supportive. I would have to say that of the 3 places I worked, I had the most creative freedom there because they were just so supportive. And I had a really great boss and a really great team, and the other leaders and kids were all really great to work with. So it was just great. And then that's why I lasted there for 18 years.
Was it really 18 years you were there?
18 years, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I used to say that, a person who started the day I was born could now vote. And so, and do other things as well. So I just, after 18 years, I started getting a little bored around the 16-year point, kind of like, okay, I've done this. It's time to give other people an opportunity. And, I was sort of thinking, okay, what's next? So that's what happened there.
And before we get on to what happens next, I wanted to sort of step back from the sort of the specifics of your career and your expertise and what you've achieved in terms of programming. But you've always publicly advocated the need for more women in animation. And when I was thinking about this podcast and doing a little bit of research, I came across articles and interviews that you've done back in like the early 2000s about this. So I'm just wondering if you think over the period you've been in the industry, and you've mentioned a lot of very, very successful women whilst we've been talking. Do you think that there's been a positive change in terms of the number of women in the industry, the number of women in high-level positions? Do you see that as a positive change?
Yeah, I always felt that, like, the creators, the show creators, should be half men, half women, just like population. And it was really hard to get to that point, particularly at Cartoon Network, because people they were programming at that point at Cartoon to a boys' audience. And so I certainly had the go-ahead to work with women, but their shorts didn't always fit the cartoon mold. And then they wouldn't necessarily test that well. And so I had a little bit of trouble bringing female creators in. I worked hard at giving a lot of the women directors opportunities, but that sometimes there was a limit to what would end up happening there. But I felt like, certainly the goal was there, and not just me and not just the other women. I think a lot of people wanted to, make sure that the kids TV industry became more, sort of more even in terms of women, more diverse. It was hard. It was hard because the people going into kids TV tended to be, white men, and preschool tended to have a fair amount of white women. Wasn't that diverse. A lot of women, weren't pitching shows for Cartoon Network. And, when they did, it didn't always end up being a go. So, we did what we could, but I feel like, that with Gina Davis, that awareness really took off in a way that made all decision makers at all levels doing all different things a little more aware. And then women in animation really, under Marge Dean, really stepped up the pressure. And so, it was a lot of people doing a lot of things. And yes, I think it's better now. I just saw the creator of Primos, the show on the show on Disney, Disney Plus. Natasha, she is a female creator making a super funny, super crazy show, and I feel like this is what I was dreaming of. This is the exact person who has gotten this opportunity and has made it work. And I feel like, yes, it's so much better now. It's not perfect, but it's so much better. Rebecca Sugar and Julia Pott and just all those women who have been given opportunities by places like Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon and Disney. It took more time than it should have. But the industry is definitely better for women now, better for people from all different backgrounds. And thank God.
Indeed. And training's also been very important to you. And I think you mentioned earlier on about your college days. And I think you've gone, you're now a visiting lecturer in cinema and media studies at the University of Pennsylvania, which was your own college. Right. Is that an important part of what you do now?
Oh, yeah. I started teaching there in over a decade ago. I've been there for a while now. And I feel like part of my goal is to be there for people who are either looking to get into the industry or looking to understand it better, or looking to understand the trends of animation or children's programming so that they can help predict things. So I feel like my contribution to Penn and to academia is to be that person. To be that person who teaches the course or shares the information that helps people. And definitely some of my students, I've helped them get into the industry, and I've helped them meet people and find work. Although, there's not much going on right now, so I haven't been able to help the last few people get work. But definitely, from my class, there have been a few people who have ended up in the industry and who are doing interesting things. And it's, I think it's important for people to, if they have that inclination to teach. I do. When I'm not teaching, I will just stop people on the street and give them lectures on things. So it's better for me to teach and channel my energy into that rather than, boring people. My poor children, they've had to listen to so many explanations of things. But the goal that I have really is just to be there for other people who need someone like that. And, with the industry the way it is, it's actually been interesting how many people have reached out to kind of understand what's going on and when is it going to end. And I find myself saying, there have been so many, every decade there's been a downturn in the industry. Every decade since kids TV started in the 50s. And the thing that always gets the industry back up and going after one of those downturns is almost always a new technology or a new platform. And the new technology or new platform always says, we're going to do it differently. And then they make some major change in the industry, and then they do it. And then that goes on until the next thing comes along. So we are in a downturn, which was practically on schedule, and there will be a new technology at the end of this, or a new platform or something, and that will bring us out of this funk. Because that's happened every decade since it started. So,
well, I think that is the most brilliant segue into the next point I wanted to bring up with you, which is, you said you enjoy getting in at the start of something, Nickelodeon, same with Cartoon Network, and you're now at Duolingo, which most people would probably say, oh yeah, that's that language learning app. It's really, really good. But obviously you're going to be doing new stuff there. So I guess my question is, what attracted you to a language learning app? What was it in that you saw, wow, I see an opportunity here with my skills and stuff I've learned over the years. What's the plan at Duolingo? Are you moving the brand into content?
That's a very good question, and the answer is probably not the one you're expecting. So I was sitting at dinner, and my daughter was talking about how she was a Lily, and I said, "What show is that from?" And she said, "Oh, it's not from a show; it's from Duolingo." And I said, "The language app?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "They have characters?" And she said, "Oh, yeah. They have animation. You should look at it. You would like it." And I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting." And so I did. That night after dinner, I downloaded it and I looked at it, and they did have characters and they did have animation. And I was really taken with how much character was in the characters in just what looked like maybe 6 frames of animation. And so I got very curious. Okay, what program are they using and how do they do this? And so I watched a Duocon video from the guy who had created the characters, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And then, so that was, say, mid-March. I started doing Duolingo. I thought it was really cool. I started learning Spanish again. And then at the very beginning of May, so maybe 6 weeks later, I get a call from my boss at PBS who tells me she's decided to leave. 2 days later, I get a call from a headhunter, a guy I knew, telling me about this job at Duolingo, and it was sort of interesting sounding, and I was curious because now I'm a Duolingo user, and I really wanted to, my initial goal was I would like to talk to the people there because maybe I could make a show about learning Spanish with them. So that was my first idea. Was this seems like a great way to get to know those people. So I get into a conversation with the person who was hiring, and we get into this long discussion about Duolingo and animation and what did they want to do? And he said they were doing stories and they needed someone to edit those, and had these characters and they were doing a lot of work with them. They were making animated shorts. They were going to do other things. And I thought, wow, this is a really interesting opportunity. And so I just went for it. I just thought, wow, this seems like a really cool place. The vibe reminded me a little of the early days of Nick. And I thought, this is like the kind of thing I like, getting in somewhere early where they really don't know what exactly they're going to do. And then, sort of helping to build things. That's always what I like, is either fixing or building something. And so, it surprised me, but I got the job, and I got the job because I had worked on shows that all the people who were interviewing me had liked when they were growing up. And I thought, ooh, that worked. That worked out well. And so I was very, I was certain that, I didn't have the right background for this job. And then I got the job offer, and I took the job, and I was so excited because I really wanted to learn something new. And I always wanted to work in tech. I heard they had free lunch, and I thought, wow, that seems really cool. That's the best perk ever. And, I would say I'm kidding, but I'm almost not. I just thought, wow, tech seems like a really exciting industry, and I wonder how I could be part of that. And this was really one of the few places, if maybe the only place, that had characters and humor and stories as part of their big idea. And I thought, okay, if they can overlook the fact that I've never worked in tech, I will go there. And when they offered me the job, I was like, yay. And it's been so great because one of the things I've been doing for almost the past year has been they had these character profiles, and so I put together a team, and we have been reworking the profiles to work for a lot of the features that we're working on now. And it's been very complex, and it's been hard, and I've been I talked to probably about 60 people here to understand what they needed to use those characters for, all the various things people would need. And I factored all of that in. This is something you'd never have to do for a TV show. TV show's the one thing I'm not doing with these characters, but they need to work in all these other ways for storytelling, for humor, for, like being easily understood, for, managing a game mechanic. So, I'm sort of bridging the people I work with on the design side. I'm in the design studio team now. So, I'm listening to what the creative director, Greg Hartman, wants to do. And then I'm helping to make that happen with the, with the characters and with the people using them. And the team that I put together to do the review, it's two people who come out of learning and curriculum, one person who's a creative director who comes from an illustration background, all of them very funny, all of them, we all know the characters really well. And just, we took each profile from being 1 page to being 4 pages filled with information about that character. It's as if they're real. And now, people can call me and say, okay, I need to do this thing. Which character would be most likely to just sit around and watch TV? And I'll say, oh, Lynn. And they're like, great, thanks. And so I can do that. Or someone can call me and say, which character should I use for this? Or, we're working on a new feature that's, going to do storytelling. Can you help us with that? Sure. So it's just really interesting. And I think the thing I like the best is watching engineers. They're very similar to animators, and they always go from having an idea that sounds a little weird to having something that actually works. And it's like magic to me. And so is animation. So I feel very comfortable working with the animators because I sort of, I understand that feeling of saying, oh, I'd like to do this. And then they just say, oh, like this. And then it happens. And so, I work with a couple of people who've put together a system that, has like an infinite number of characters doing small movements, and it can, if you tell the system what you want, it will put together a series of those movements to make it look like it's animating and the character's doing the thing that you need. And if you need to slow it down, you pop a comma in and it goes a little slower, and it feels like a magic program, but it makes the characters look like they're moving, and I'm like, I can't believe this, but this is amazing. And they work quickly, and they say, do you want it to do this? Do you want it to do that? And there it is. So you can see why that would be so exciting to someone like me who used to have to wait 6 months to see something, And now it's like, make them say this, and they type it in, and then the character says it, and it's like, oh my God. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm having fun doing.
Well, I have to say, I am a Duolingo addict. I have to say, I've been doing French for a while, and it's true what you say. I mean, when I listened to you talking about those characters, and when you said, "Oh, Lynn's the most likely one to be watching TV," I thought, yeah, you're absolutely right, right. And just with those simple animations and the characterization of the voices, they really come alive to you, and it's fascinating. Yeah.
And we do things that are hard. It's not like we're just sitting here and, throwing commas in and laughing. It's like, it's hard to figure out how to do certain things because we've got 2 seconds or less. We're dealing with tiny increments, but we have to communicate a lot of information in those moments. And, it's a lot of people really love Lily. And so, the purple haired girl. And so we're figuring out, okay, what realistically can she do? What falls outside of what she does? What would it be funny to use her for? So it's a lot of things like that. So I'm not working on making a TV show. It's interesting. The number of people who use the app internationally each day is probably more people than we'd get if we made a TV show. So
Yeah.
It's just a lot easier to focus on the app and all the things that we can do in the app. We did a 5-episode webtoon on the webtoon platform, and that just premiered last week, and that was fun. That was the longest thing we've done with the characters, and we borrowed liberally from all the social media memes, and we kind of found like a happy point between the characters in the app and the characters in social media. And we did this webtoon, and it seems to be doing really well. So that's been fun. So, they let us experiment here. In fact, we're required to experiment. And, Luis, who is the CEO, has often said, push it. Make it just a little weirder. Make it a little funnier. No, make it a lot funnier. And, he just keeps pushing us. So, I like working in a place where that's the direction you get. So, I just find it like to me, it seems like a natural next step. I enjoy this, sort of this sandbox element of the industry more than I've ever enjoyed, like the management and executive side. So I feel like, I can run things, I can keep things going, but I really enjoy this piece of it, like sort of figuring out, where do we go with this? What can we do? What's possible? That's much more interesting to me.
No, that's fascinating. Sounds like you've come home.
Yeah. And like I said, the vibe here is very early Nick. It's that level of enthusiasm. It's that level of fun. Everyone except for me is very young and very just bringing a lot of new energy to it. It's great to be around. So I feel very lucky that they took a chance on me. But the thing that they needed from me was the one thing I could bring here, which is a knowledge of how to develop characters, how to use them, how to guide people through them, how to make people comfortable with using characters. And my goal is to make every person here at the company comfortable with using those characters.
Sounds very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Listen, as we're coming to the end of this, I just wanted to ask you a final few questions as you launch yourself further into the wacky world of technology. What do you think the best piece of creative advice was that you have ever been given by anybody?
Best advice that I've been given. At the time, I didn't know this was good advice, but I accepted it. I was working. I was at Cartoon Network at the time, and I was getting some pressure to work with more celebrities, and so that's never been the part of the industry that I've personally enjoyed. So I found myself sitting in Jerry Laybourne's office. She was at Oxygen at that point, and I told her I really didn't know how to get out of doing this, and she said to me, in any situation, research is your best friend. Any data that you can get is going to be the best thing that you can have. Your opinions are great, but only when layered on top of the research that you're offering to prove the point that you're trying to make. And I was like, yeah, okay. and then, of course, it was excellent advice that I have referred to, possibly 100,000 times since she said that to me. And I would, whenever I was in the middle of solving a problem, it's like, okay, well, what data do we have on this? And, every time something would go wrong, I would look at the other person and say, data point. And so, of course she was right, and it was good advice, and I have used it many times, and I've given it to many people. And, I think that was the good advice that I have gotten. So.
Okay. Good advice. Yeah. And what advice do you think, your older self would give your younger self now? You look back at, when you were starting out all those years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah. So I go back in time and give my younger self, this advice, but my younger self is indifferent. thanks to time travel, it's I'm not able to make a dent in, stubborn young me. But I think the two things I would tell myself are, one, your career isn't a rocket that you get in and just keep going up. Your career really is an amusement park, and you should enjoy it more. Go on, think of each job as a ride. Go on the ride till you've had enough, then go get on another ride, and don't focus on the job, don't focus on the power, focus on the fun. What are you going to get to do? And, do they trust you, and will they give you a lot of freedom? That, don't worry about, getting ahead. And I had to figure that out on my own, and I did figure that out. And now that's a lot of the advice I give other people is, just envision your career differently. And the other thing I would do is say, listen more and ask more questions. And I still give myself that advice probably daily, maybe sometimes more than once a day. It's a good reminder. I have a tendency to just, chat with people, but it's like the best way to chat with them, I think, is to ask them a question and then learn something. I'm in a continual mode of learning here, so I'm not going to learn anything while I'm telling someone about something. But if I do ask a question, they will answer it. So I have come to realize that's the other important thing that I would tell and do tell young Linda.
So I'm going to ask you one final question, and I am going to listen.
Okay.
What's your Duolingo learning streak?
I have exciting news, which is that the day before my birthday, I hit 1,000. So I'm at, let's see, it's
1,027. You
yes.
beat me. I'm at about 856, I think. So
which is also amazing.
Well, I'm quite proud of myself, I have to say. Yeah. Occasionally, when I have the opportunity to go to France, I even use the French I'm learning. So there you go.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's really good. I mean, Duolingo does work, and I am continually delighted when I hear Spanish popping out of my mouth. I'm almost unteachable. I'm really not good at languages, and I've been going very slowly, but I have definitely improved. The thing I've fallen in love with is Duolingo has a math app now, and I have fallen in love with the math games, and I wake up every morning, grab my phone, and do a math game. And it always, starts out to be a fun day because I just, I love doing that. I am terrible at doing math in my head, and it's helping me with math in my head. So that's been fun too. But that when I hit 1,000, I was really super thrilled, and now I'm just like, oh, I've got to keep this going now.
It becomes addictive, doesn't it?
It's very effective. Yes.
Linda, thank you so much. I know how crazy busy you are, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat today. It's been great.
Well, Julian, thank you. Thank you for the great questions. These were really fun, and this was so much fun. So thank you.
Thank you to Linda for giving us her time. A fascinating look into the career of one of the most influential kids' TV executives of recent years. And the show wouldn't happen at all without the wonderful work of Janet Balmforth at Liberia Consulting for her incredible organisational skills, to Julian Scott at Film London for his charm, wit and talent as our host. Find out more about Film London at filmlondon.org.uk. And the edit skills of Odelia Sikinga, who is also an awesome kids development and production executive. Find her on LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, like, share, and we'll see you soon for another one.